All right, let's talk about how to finance new construction. Couple things to think about here. You're always going to need some sort of cash. Now, if you're getting a private lender to do the funding, you can do whatever you negotiate, but the vast majority of the time, you're going to need cash, even with the private lender, unless potentially they're just partnering with you and taking a big piece, likely 50% of the profit, and providing all the cash. That is possible, but go into this expecting to need some cash. And beyond that, the considerations that you look for when looking at different sources of money are the origination fees, the monthly interest rate, the draw process, down payment required, and length of the loan. And one more I'd throw in there is the experience and documentation required, which goes hand in hand with down payment required, or they're inverse. So there's four ways that I have funded new construction. First being hard money, which is what we'll start with and is what we're looking at right here. Second being local banks, which are kind of the opposite end of that spectrum. Then you have lines of credit. And finally, we'll hit on the private lenders. So, hard money lenders like this are not hard to find. If you're in any major city, there will be dozens, if not hundreds of them. Call around, you can find these people easily. That is not hard. What is important to understand is the pros and cons. Pros are you need less experience and you need less money down. Cons are you have shorter time frames, shorter loan terms, usually 6 to 9, maybe 12 months, higher interest rate, higher origination, and usually their draw process is pretty similar to a traditional bank. So this is an example from last year. I built a duplex. I kept that duplex. There's some videos I have on it. And I used a hard money lender because ultimately it's going to be, I knew, refinanced into a permanent loan. And so extra costs for origination and interest weren't a big deal because it was going into that 30-year mortgage that tenants are going to pay for me. So I used a hard money lender and I paid 2.5 points for origination. And then I paid, I think this was 12% interest approximately. And then they have higher fees too, just to originate. There's always going to be some fees involved, but I only put in the cost of the land and the plans, which was about 22 or 23,000. They financed the remainder for me. So this is a great option if you don't have a lot of money, but there's got to be a significant spread. Again, this is pretty typical for a hard money lender to just need the land and plans, but this doesn't work if I'm building a $500,000 house that's only going to be worth 550, right? This built for 420-ish and was worth 579 is what it appraised at. Of course, there was land and plans and interest in there, but you get the point. There was a substantial spread. So that's really important, really in all scenarios, but even more so with hard money lenders. And again, these are shorter terms, so really make sure ahead of time you have a permanent loan option set up just in case things go wrong. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have small local banks. So I talked to ABC Bank, which is a bank I use. I have lines of credit with them and some money with them. And they were looking at 75% loan to cost, may go up to 80, but very likely 75 from what he said. So they don't care if you're building a $500,000, retail home for 250, right? It doesn't matter how big the spread is. They're pretty dead set on 75 or at best 80% loan to cost. So what does that look like? Well, if your total cost for land, plans, build, everything were 280, then they would want $70,000 of your money into that build as down payment. So if you paid 20 for the land, 2,000 for the plans, you'd need another 48,000 to close the loan, and then of course you got to pay the interest payments along the way. So call it 10,000 for reserves for interest payments. So in this scenario, you need a lot more money down, but you get longer loan terms, you get cheaper rates, 1% origination, variable rate off of prime, which I think was 8.5 at the time. Rates are high right now, probably something around that. So it's less expensive, but it needs more documentation to get the loan. Usually they'll want to see experience, so it's hard to start with this sort of bank. You might be able to compensate for that just with a competent contractor, but that's another conversation, right? So it's a spectrum. More money down, more documentation, kind of more bureaucracy, and it's cheaper, less money down, shorter loan terms, and you're looking at higher rates, higher origination, right? So again, just like with hard money lenders, calling around to local banks is easy enough. Finding these people is not hard, and you're going to get quotes very similar to this from just about everybody. All right, so those are the first two options. Now, getting to less traditional options, don't forget lines of credit. Chase gave me a $175,000 line of credit purely off of my tax returns and pulling my credit. So very little documentation. There was no origination fee. There's a yearly fee that's a couple $100, and then interest right now is 9.85%. So that's not bad considering how easy this was to get. If you have stronger tax returns than I do, they might give you 300 grand. You might be able to do a whole spec home just with a line of credit, right? This isn't quite enough, but it's a big chunk, and I just use this generally for my land flipping business. So that's another option beyond these unsecured lines. If you have a rental property or a primary residence with a lot of equity in it, you can get a home equity line of credit or a HELOC. Will likely have better rates. In either case, make sure you're clear on whether they can just call these due and cancel these. Make sure you don't put yourself in a situation where something could go wrong in the economy and the bank can call you and say, hey, I'm closing this. You have to pay this back now, because obviously that could be a problem. But these are also options for funding new construction. Finally, the last thing is private lenders. I alluded to this at the beginning of the conversation, but ultimately, if you have a private lender that trusts you, the loan terms can be whatever you negotiate. It could be no money and no payments out of pocket along the way, and you just split the bill at the end. Could be, close to hard money rates. It could be anything that you negotiate. So, those are the four categories. In my opinion, the private lenders are kind of the pinnacle where it becomes so easy over time, right? When somebody trusts you and you've done business with them, you always want things documented. I would never tell you to do a handshake deal, but it can get to a point where you have a private lender you've used over and over, and it's just a matter of, okay, this is the contract we use every time. This is how we do it every time. It's just, hey, I'm doing another one. Here's the contract, sign it, and wire the money. It can be so simple, very little work, very little clerical work. Whereas using any of these other options, the hard money lender being lesser, the traditional small bank being more so, you're going to deal with paperwork and process and a lot of time waster for you. Whereas with a private lender that you have trust and experience with, it can be very, very easy. So, to summarize, whoever you're talking to about financing your build, make sure you talk through the origination fee, the monthly interest rate, the draw process, down payment required, experience and documentation required, and length of the loan. Those are the main factors that matter. And the other thing I would say is just make sure that you always have a backup plan if something goes wrong. These are all short-term loan options. So if you're talking to that private lender, what happens if you're building a house to sell and it doesn't sell? Or if you're getting the hard money loan, right? Do you have a permanent loan option? Or do you know maybe the hard money lender personally and have extensions available? Have a backup plan. Things are going to go wrong no matter how you do this. Always have a plan B. Anyways, if you have experience with this, let me know. If you have any comments or questions, please share down below.